Hello and welcome to Top Story. A suicide bombing in Israel on Monday, the first in more than a year, killed a woman in the desert town of Dimona and has reawakened fears of infiltration by militant Palestinian terror groups. The attack was immediately condemned by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, but responsibility for the bombing was claimed by the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades, a militia which is loosely affiliated with Abbas's own Fatah organization. It said it had carried out the attack in cooperation with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine. The two men are thought to have come from Gaza, which is controlled by the Islamic organization Hamas. It praised the attack as a blow against Israeli occupation. It's thought the two suicide bombers, one of whom was shot before he could trigger his explosives, may have exploited the recent breach in the border between Egypt and the Gaza Strip to enter Egypt and then cross back into Israel at another point. Well, joining me now to discuss the implications of the suicide bombing is Jean-Pierre Filiou, Associate Professor at the Institute of Political Studies here in Paris. Thanks very much for being on Top Story. More than a year since the last suicide bombing in Israel, but do you think this is likely the start of a pattern, or do you think this is more opportunistic?
Until now it seems much more opportunistic, but what is true is that it's nightmarish for Israel, because yesterday, two of their nightmares came true. First, the fact that explosives could be smuggled from Egypt to Gaza. Second, that terror groups could infiltrate Israel from Gaza that is not sealed anymore.
And the interesting thing, too, is that Al-Aqsa, who claimed responsibility for this attack, says that it has infiltrated more suicide bombers into Israel in preparation for future attacks.
No, all the terror groups always want to exaggerate the threat they represent. Of course, this has to be taken very seriously, but let's hope that it's not totally true.
The Israelis are suggesting that the reason this happened was because of the breach in the security border on the Gaza Strip between Egypt and Gaza. Do you think that's likely to be the case?
It could be an explanation, but there are a lot of tunnels between Egyptian territory and the Gaza Strip where a lot of weapons and explosives have been smuggled through the Gaza Strip much before the breach.
Do you think, though, that this will prove the exception that proves the rule as far as security for Israel is concerned? It's put its own security wall through the West Bank, and that has been, or appears to have been, relatively successful for the Israelis. Do you think that this is just a one-off that proves how successful that wall has been?
It could be that way. If it's not the case, that means that the whole pattern of security priorities that was built by Israel through walls and fences is not enough to prevent a threat that only a political process could help to diffuse.
The responsibility, as we've been saying, for this attack was claimed by Al-Aqsa, which is linked to Fatah, which is led by Mahmoud Abbas, the Palestinian Authority president. How much of a blow do you think this is to his authority and his credibility as a reliable partner in the peace process with the Israelis?
Well, he immediately condemned the attack and is totally innocent from this act, that is for sure. How could he control militants that are now in Gaza under the shadow of Hamas? But that proves that while Hamas is still a structured party with a heavy internal discipline, Fatah is slowly going into the quicksand of militia anarchy. And that is another indication of that.
Well, it appears a very fractured organization.
It is very fractured because the Palestinian territories are very fractured. So in fact you have a leader for every town and sometimes from every village, and they answer only to the orders of the local leader. They don't listen to Ramallah or not even to the regional leader.
So in that case, the Israeli claim, or the claim of at least some Israelis, that Mahmoud Abbas is unable to fulfill his part of the roadmap to peace, in other words, providing security to the Israelis, is largely true if he's unable to control his own organization.
I think he cannot be held responsible for anything happening in Gaza where he has no supporters trying to enforce his orders.
Hamas says that the bombing was the natural consequence of what the Israelis have been doing in Gaza over the last few months. Do they have a point, do you think?
Well, Hamas is of course playing this tactic because they don't want to claim the responsibility for the attack, and they want to put on the forefront other groups to show that they are the representative of another national consensus that would be the consensus of the military struggle or terror actions.
What about the use of suicide bombing as a tactic by the Palestinians? Research shows that it's popular amongst the Palestinians, but how effective has it been? They tried it in the 90s, it didn't seem to work then. They tried it in the beginning of this decade, it didn't work particularly successfully. Do you think it's a tactic that they're likely to return to again?
Well, the last polls that were conducted among the Palestinians show that terror attacks and suicide bombings are not popular, that the population see very well that they didn't help in any way to promote the Palestinian cause, and on the contrary, they tarnished it and they made their life even more miserable. The problem is that people like the one who acted yesterday didn't act on popular impulse. They were a small group that was probably totally maverick in the Gaza Strip.
What about the Israeli response? Do you think we're going to see tough reprisals from the Israelis?
Well, already yesterday they bombed the Gaza Strip and they killed an important leader of Hamas. But again, you have a Fatah terror attack and a Hamas leader who is killed, and maybe other raids today. It's just much more a show of force than a concrete retaliation and a precise answer to a precise threat.
And this just locks us again into that cycle of reprisals and counterattacks. Is there any way out of this at all, do you think?
Well, I think the only way out of this is, of course, a political process following the guidelines of Annapolis. But it has to be quick because obviously we're running out of time between people getting more and more disillusioned from the absence of result of the Annapolis process, and the extremists will try more and more to control the agenda and to, of course, sabotage this peace process.
And judging by the initial reaction in Israel, that certainly seems to be the case. People are already suggesting that there's no future in pursuing the Annapolis peace process. Do you think this is a fatal blow from the Israeli point of view to the peace talks?
Well, the democratic debate is always very positive and very energetic in Israel. So we'll see what will come out of it in 2 or 3 days, not the initial and emotional reaction to this terror attack.
Hamas hasn't claimed responsibility for this, but again, it sort of underlines the point, does it not, that Hamas has to be brought into the process at some stage?
Well, for example, at the Egyptian border point, crossing point with Gaza, it's very difficult to ensure the security without associating Hamas in a way or another.
Okay, I'm afraid that's where we're going to have to end it. That's all we have time for today. Thanks to our guest, Jean-Pierre Filiou of the Institute of Political Studies here in Paris. Join us again tomorrow for another edition of Top Story. Goodbye.
The program dedicated to international news was brought to you by Le Monde.
With Observers, France24 offers you a new insight into the news. Discover the news via photos, videos and live accounts from people who directly experience events across the globe. Observers will also offer you eyewitness images that have never been seen before, images that will be verified by our journalist teams. With Observers, you can connect to a global network that will give you an inside view on issues that concern you, enabling you to communicate directly with France24's correspondents. Observers, your eyes across the world.